The morning cycle lights flickered on across the Vallis Prime border station, bathing the pristine control room in an artificial dawn. Colonel Vexile's scaled fingers drummed against the polished surface of his command console, his 4 eyes scanning the latest security reports from the Outer Rim. 500 years of Zaharian dominance had bred a particular kind of complacency in the Empire's military leadership, the kind that made routine border patrols feel like a punishment rather than a necessity. Another uneventful cycle, Vexile muttered, his secondary eyelids blinking in sequence as he suppressed a yawn. The border station hummed with the familiar sounds of a military operation running at peak efficiency, the soft chatter of crew members, the gentle beeps of monitoring equipment, and the occasional announcement over the internal communication system. Lieutenant Keltar approached with a datapad, his posture perfect as military protocol demanded. "Colonel, long-range sensors have detected unusual activity in Sector 739. The energy signatures don't match any known patterns in our database." Vexile's dorsal crest rose slightly, the first indication of interest he'd shown all morning. Pirates, perhaps? Or some foolish traders venturing where they shouldn't? "Unlikely, sir. The energy output suggests a large number of vessels. Preliminary count indicates over 200 distinct signatures." The colonel's crest now fully extended, a physiological response to sudden alarm that his species had never evolved away despite centuries of technological advancement. 200? That's not a raiding party or trade convoy. Show me. The main view screen shifted to display a 3-dimensional representation of Sector 739. Hundreds of blue dots moved in perfect formation toward the Empire's territorial boundary. "Have they responded to standard identification protocols?" "No, sir. Complete communication silence. We've been broadcasting on all frequencies for the past 30 minutes. Vexile rose from his command chair, his full height impressive even for a Zaharian. "Alert, High Command. I want 3 battle cruisers diverted to our position immediately, and get me everything we have on recent military movements of known species in this quadrant." As the command center erupted into controlled chaos, Vexile couldn't shake the unease growing in his gut. In 5 centuries of imperial expansion, the Zaharians had catalogued, subjugated, or allied with every spacefaring race within reach of their borders. An unknown fleet of this size simply couldn't exist, unless they'd come from beyond the charted regions of space, or unless someone had been hiding their true capabilities all along. "Sir," called the sensor officer, her voice betraying the tension everyone felt, "I'm detecting unusual configurations in the approaching vessels. They don't appear to be purpose-built warships." "Explain," Vexile demanded. "The structures suggest civilian craft, cargo haulers, mining vessels, passenger liners, but they've been modified, heavily modified." Vexile's secondary heart began to beat faster. "Which species operates them?" The officer hesitated before answering. "Based on radiation signatures and engine configurations, they appear to be human." The control room fell silent. Humans were known to the Empire, of course, a relatively primitive species from a resource-rich but isolated system. The Zaharians had documented their existence centuries ago, but classified them as a minimal threat, unworthy of immediate conquest or serious diplomatic consideration. Their technology was generations behind the Empire's, their military presence limited to their home system and a handful of nearby colonies. Or so they had believed. "Humans?" Vexile finally broke the silence, disbelief evident in his flanged voice. "That's impossible. Their entire civilization couldn't field a fleet half this size." Yet the evidence continued to materialize on the screens before him, undeniable and increasingly terrifying. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from the lead vessel." Vexile straightened his uniform and composed himself. First impressions mattered in interstellar diplomacy, even with supposedly inferior species. On screen, the image of a human male appeared before them. He wore no uniform but was dressed in practical clothing that suggested function over formality. His face bore the lines of experience rather than youth, with graying hair at his temples and eyes that held a weary determination. "This is Captain Jake Murphy of the Earth Exodus Fleet. We request safe passage through your territory and peaceful dialogue regarding potential settlement options beyond your borders." Vexile's training took over. "This is Colonel Vexile of the Zaharian Empire's Border Command. Your unauthorized approach with a military fleet of this size constitutes an act of aggression against the Empire. Power down your weapon systems and prepare to be boarded for inspection, or we will respond with appropriate force." The human showed no sign of intimidation. "Colonel, we have no hostile intentions. Our fleet is comprised of civilian vessels that have been adapted for a long journey. We seek only passage and, potentially, a new home. Earth is dying, and we carry what remains of our civilization." "A convenient claim," Vexile responded coldly, "but our sensors detect weapons emplacements on your vessels. Explain." "We've traversed unprotected space for years to reach this point. Basic defenses were necessary, but I assure you, we come in peace." Vexile's diplomatic training warred with his military instincts. The human seemed sincere, but the Empire had not survived for 5 centuries by taking alien species at their word. "Maintain your current position. Any advancement toward our border will be considered hostile action. We will verify your claims and respond accordingly." The transmission ended, and Vexile immediately called for a secure channel to High Command. This situation had escalated far beyond a border commander's authority. In the privacy of his office, Vexile faced the holographic images of Commander Zeke, General Zelmon, and Admiral Krixman, 3 of the Empire's highest-ranking military leaders. "A human fleet?" Admiral Krixman's disbelief was palpable even through the holographic projection. Their technological capacity was assessed less than a decade ago. They barely had functional interplanetary travel. "The sensor data is conclusive," Vexile replied. 217 vessels, all of human design but heavily modified. They claim to be refugees. General Zelmon, always the pragmatist, leaned forward. "Even if their homeworld faces some catastrophe, this response is unprecedented. A species doesn't develop a fleet of this magnitude in secret. Unless they were hiding their capabilities," Commander Zeke suggested, his tone dark with suspicion. "It wouldn't be the first time a supposedly primitive species concealed their true technology until they were ready to strike." Admiral Krixman's expression remained thoughtful. "What do our intelligence reports indicate about Earth's current status?" "That's the concerning part," Vexile admitted. "Our last comprehensive survey was 75 years ago. Standard protocol called for another assessment 5 years ago, but it was deemed low priority given their previous development trajectory." A heavy silence fell over the conference. The Empire's military doctrine relied on accurate intelligence and technological superiority. If they had catastrophically underestimated human capabilities, it represented a significant failure. "I've dispatched 3 battlecruisers to your position," Admiral Krixman finally said. "They will arrive within 12 hours. Until then, maintain your position and gather as much intelligence as possible. If these humans truly are refugees, we can address their request according to Imperial protocols for displaced populations." "And if they're not?" Vexile asked. Commander Zeke answered with cold certainty. "Then we will demonstrate why the Zaharian Empire has remained unchallenged for 5 centuries." The communication ended, leaving Vexile alone with his thoughts and growing concern. Something about this situation felt wrong, not just unexpected, but fundamentally incorrect according to everything he understood about galactic politics and species development. Humans simply couldn't have built this fleet without the Empire noticing. unless they had help, or unless the Empire had made a grave miscalculation. Aboard the lead ship of the human fleet, Captain Jake Murphy sighed heavily as the communication with the Zaharian colonel ended. He turned to face the small group of leaders who had gathered in the converted cargo hold that now served as the command center of the Marathon, formerly a bulk freighter transporting ore between Earth and its mining colonies. "Well, that went about as expected," he said, running a hand through his graying hair. Lisa Bennett, chief engineer of the fleet and the architect behind most of their vessel conversions, shook her head. "They're scared. Did you see his crest? Full extension. That's an automatic fear response for Zaharians." "Fear makes them dangerous," Amy Rodriguez countered. The former intelligence officer had spent the past 3 years studying everything humans knew about the various alien civilizations they might encounter during their journey, especially species with a militaristic hierarchy like theirs. Their culture doesn't allow for backing down once they've taken a defensive stance. Murphy moved to the central holographic display that showed the current position of their fleet relative to Zaharian territory. "They're buying time. Those battle cruisers the colonel mentioned will be here within 12 hours, and then we'll be dealing with warships specifically designed to obliterate fleets like ours." "We could change course," suggested Diana Hayes, commander of the ground forces that would eventually establish their settlements. "Find another route around their territory." Murphy shook his head. "The navigational data we purchased from the Kelsian traders is clear. This is the only viable path to the habitable systems we've identified. Every other route would take years longer and expose us to even greater dangers. Not to mention our supplies," Lisa added grimly. "We calculated this journey down to the last calorie and component. Major detours would mean starvation before we reached suitable planets." An uncomfortable silence fell over the command center. The reality of their situation was stark. 3 years ago, when Earth scientists confirmed that cascading environmental collapse would render the planet uninhabitable within a decade, humanity had made its choice. Rather than wait for the slow death of their civilization, they would gather everything they could: people, resources, knowledge, culture, and seek a new beginning among the stars. Operation Exodus had begun with a worldwide effort to convert every available spacecraft into vessels capable of sustaining life during a multi-year journey. Cargo ships became living quarters. Research vessels became hydroponics gardens. Mining platforms became manufacturing centers. Even tourist cruise liners were stripped and rebuilt to serve as schools, hospitals, and cultural repositories. It was the greatest engineering project in human history, completed with the desperation of a species facing extinction. 217 ships carrying just over 7 million people, all that could be saved from a population of billions. "We need to implement the Valkyrie Protocol," Amy finally said, breaking the silence. Murphy's jaw tightened. "That's a last resort." "We're approaching that point faster than we expected," she insisted. "The Zaharians won't let us pass peacefully. Not with their empire's reputation built on military dominance. They can't afford to look weak by allowing an unknown fleet to traverse their territory unchallenged." Lisa nodded reluctantly. "The technical preparations are complete. We can activate within 2 hours." Murphy looked around at the faces of his leadership team, people who had once been engineers, scientists, teachers, and soldiers on Earth, now transformed by necessity into the decision-makers for humanity's last hope. "Begin preparations," he finally ordered, "but we maintain our current diplomatic approach. If there's any chance of peaceful passage, we take it." As the meeting dispersed, Murphy remained at the holographic display, studying the vast territory controlled by the Zaharian Empire. Somewhere beyond that boundary lay the constellation of stars where their astronomers had identified potentially habitable worlds, places where humanity might begin again. If they could get there. Back on the Vallis Prime station, Colonel Vexile found himself unable to rest despite being off duty. He paced his quarters, periodically checking the latest sensor data from the human fleet, which remained stationary at the coordinates he had specified. Something nagged at his military instincts. If these humans were truly refugees, their behavior made sense. But if they harbored hostile intentions, why announce their presence? Why not use stealth or deception to infiltrate Imperial space? Unable to resolve his doubts through reflection alone, Vexile decided to review the Empire's historical data on humanity. He accessed the station's intelligence archives and began reading the reports compiled over centuries of distant observation. The earliest records described a pre-spaceflight civilization confined to a single planet, remarkable only for their rapid technological development and self-destructive tendencies. Later assessments noted their expansion to nearby planets and moons, always hampered by resource limitations and internal conflicts. The most recent comprehensive report, compiled 75 years ago, classified humans as a Category 3 species, capable of limited interstellar travel but lacking the unified purpose and resources to expand significantly beyond their home system. But the report contained a notation that caught Vexile's attention. Despite technological limitations, humans display unusual adaptability and resource utilization efficiency. Their vessels and habitats frequently serve multiple functions and undergo continuous modification rather than purpose-specific construction. Vexile paused, remembering the sensor officer's observation about the approaching fleet. The vessels weren't purpose-built warships but modified civilian craft. Could that be significant? He continued reading, finding another intriguing assessment. Human social structures prioritize individual specialization within collaborative frameworks, allowing rapid technological innovation despite limited resources. However, their political fragmentation prevents coordinated large-scale projects necessary for significant expansion. Except, Vexile realized that assessment assumed normal conditions. What would happen if humans faced extinction? Would that threat overcome their political divisions? His research was interrupted by an urgent communication. Colonel, sensors have detected unusual activity within the human fleet. Energy signatures are fluctuating across multiple vessels. Weapons charging? Vexile asked, immediately alert. Unclear, sir. The patterns don't match known weapons systems. It appears more like reconfiguration. I'm on my way to the command center, Vexile responded, his unease growing. By the time he arrived, the situation had evolved further. The sensor officer reported with visible confusion. Sir, we're now detecting what appears to be small craft deployment from multiple vessels in the human fleet. Combat fighters? Vexile demanded. No, sir. They're too small and lack weapon signatures, more like drones or probes. The tactical display showed hundreds of tiny objects emerging from the larger vessels, spreading outward in a complex pattern. What's their purpose? Vexile asked, more to himself than anyone else. The answer came moments later when the communication officer called out, Sir, our sensor array is experiencing interference. The drones appear to be generating false signatures. Clarify, Vexile ordered sharply. They're creating ghost images, sir. Our sensors now show over 500 vessels where there should be only 200. A cold realization washed over Vexile. This was no refugee fleet blundering into Imperial space. This was a coordinated military operation using tactics the Empire had never encountered. Battle stations, all personnel to combat positions, he commanded. Activate all defensive systems and prepare for possible engagement. As the station's alert klaxons sounded, Vexile opened a channel to his superiors. High Command, the human fleet has initiated what appears to be electronic warfare. Request immediate reinforcement beyond the 3 battlecruisers already dispatched. The response was immediate. Additional forces are being mobilized. Colonel, the 4th Fleet will divert to your position. Estimated arrival in 36 hours. You are authorized to take defensive action if the humans make any move toward Imperial territory. 36 hours. Vexile would need to manage this crisis with limited resources until then. Sir, the tactical officer interrupted, the human fleet is changing formation. On the main display, Vexile watched as the 200 actual vessels, now surrounded by 300 ghost images, began to reorganize. Rather than a single cohesive unit, they were forming into 5 distinct groups. They're preparing to scatter, Vexile realized aloud. If they split their forces, we won't have enough ships to intercept all groups once our cruisers arrive. He made a swift decision. Contact the human commander immediately. When Captain Murphy appeared on screen again, Vexile dispensed with diplomatic niceties. Your deployment of electronic warfare measures constitutes a hostile act. Return your fleet to its previous configuration immediately. Murphy's expression remained calm. Colonel, we're simply organizing our fleet for more efficient travel. The probes we've deployed are standard navigational aids for a group of our size. They are generating false sensor readings, Vexile countered. This is a known military tactic. An unfortunate side effect of our technology. Nothing more, Murphy replied smoothly. Our systems were developed independently from yours. Some interference is to be expected. Vexile's patience was wearing thin. You will recall those devices and maintain your position, or we will consider your actions hostile and respond accordingly. I understand your concerns, Murphy said, his tone conciliatory but firm. However, we cannot remain stationary indefinitely. Earth's destruction has forced us to seek new homes. We hope to do so peacefully, but we will proceed with our journey one way or another. The transmission ended before Vexile could respond, a deliberate power move that didn't escape his notice. The human was testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push before meeting resistance. Sir, the tactical officer reported, the human vessels are now advancing toward our border at low speed. Vexile felt trapped between conflicting imperatives. Imperial doctrine demanded an immediate show of force against such blatant disregard for Zaharian authority, but his limited resources made any confrontation risky until reinforcements arrived. Target the nearest human vessel with our long-range weapons, he ordered. Warning shot only. Establish a perimeter boundary and make it clear they cannot advance further. The station's main cannon fired a high-energy pulse that deliberately passed in front of the lead human ship, missing it by a calculated margin, but demonstrating both precision and power. For a moment, it seemed the warning had been effective. The human fleet slowed, then stopped its advance. But the respite was short-lived. Sir, we're detecting energy spikes across multiple human vessels, the sensor officer reported urgently. They appear to be activating something. Before Vexile could request clarification, the tactical officer called out, Incoming! Multiple projectiles launched from the human fleet. Evasive maneuvers, all defensive systems to maximum, Vexile commanded, his training taking over despite the shock. The station rocked as its shield generators strained against the unexpected assault, but something wasn't right about the attack. Damage report, Vexile demanded once the initial barrage had ended. Minimal, sir, came the confused response. Our shields held at 92% capacity. The projectiles were unusual, not standard military ordnance. Explain, Vexile ordered. They appear to be modified mining charges, sir, industrial equipment repurposed as weapons. The tactical display updated to show that, while the station had been targeted, most of the projectiles had been directed at the space surrounding it, creating a field of debris and lingering energy disruptions that would interfere with sensors and weapons targeting. A second wave followed immediately, but instead of targeting the station directly, these projectiles detonated in carefully calculated positions. creating a navigational hazard between the station and the approaching Zaharian battlecruisers. They're creating obstacles, Vexile realized, slowing our reinforcements while they advance. Sure enough, the human fleet had resumed its forward movement, now accelerating toward the Imperial border. The ghost images generated by their drones made it impossible to track which vessels were real and which were mere sensor phantoms. Vexile had to make a decision. He could commit his limited forces to an immediate attack, potentially leaving the station vulnerable if he misjudged the humans' capabilities. Or he could wait for reinforcements, allowing the humans to penetrate further into Imperial territory. Neither option aligned with Imperial doctrine or his own military instincts. "Prepare all available fighters for launch," he finally ordered. "Target the lead vessels of the human fleet. If we can eliminate their command structure, we may disrupt their entire operation." As the station's fighter squadrons deployed, Vexile couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial about his opponent. These weren't the actions of desperate refugees, but neither did they match the expected tactics of an invasion force. What exactly were these humans trying to accomplish? On board the Marathon, Captain Murphy watched the Zaharian fighters approach with grim determination. The initial phases of the Valkyrie protocol had worked as planned. The electronic warfare drones had created confusion, and the modified mining charges had established the defensive perimeter they needed. Now came the most dangerous part. "All vessels, initiate Phase 3, he ordered through the fleet-wide communication system. "Combat Groups Alpha through Echo, proceed as planned. Support vessels maintain ghost coverage and prepare manufacturing cycles." Lisa Bennett monitored the technical aspects of the operation from her station. "The mining platforms have begun conversion to ammunition production. Fabrication vessels are spinning up their foundries. We'll have continuous supply within 30 minutes. "The Zaharians are launching fighters," Amy reported, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. 43 craft, standard Imperial interceptor configuration. Murphy nodded. "Right on schedule. Diana, your teams are ready?" Diana Hayes checked her console. "Defense squads deployed to all primary vessels. The converted drilling rigs are charged and targeting systems are online." "Remember," Murphy reminded them all, "we're not trying to destroy them. Just create enough confusion and resistance to convince them that fighting us isn't worth the cost." As he spoke, the first wave of Zaharian fighters entered weapons range. They moved with the precision expected of the Empire's elite pilots, forming attack patterns designed to overwhelm their target's defensive capabilities. But they had trained to fight against conventional military vessels. The human fleet was anything but conventional. "Industrial lasers online," Diana reported, targeting their approach vectors. Across the fleet, what had once been mining equipment designed to cut through asteroids now directed its energy outward. The beams lacked the refined focusing technology of military weapons, but they compensated with raw power, creating deadly fields of energy that the Zaharian fighters were forced to navigate. Several fighters were caught in the unexpected defensive screen, their shields failing against the sustained industrial-grade energy output. Others managed to evade the lasers, only to face another surprise: clouds of metallic dust released from what had once been ore processing facilities. The microscopic particles adhered to the fighters' hulls, interfering with sensor systems and engine efficiency. It wasn't enough to destroy the Imperial craft, but it degraded their performance just enough to offset their technological advantage. "They're regrouping for another attack run," Amy warned. "More coordinated this time." Murphy had expected this. "Activate the construction drones. Pattern Omega." This had been Lisa's most audacious modification. Construction drones, originally designed to build habitats in space, had been reprogrammed for a very different purpose. Hundreds launched from the fleet's engineering vessels, each carrying small reflective panels. As they spread between the human fleet and the approaching fighters, the drones assembled the panels into large reflective surfaces, essentially spaceborne mirrors positioned at precisely calculated angles. When the Zaharian fighters fired their energy weapons, many of the beams struck these reflective surfaces and were redirected back toward their source, forcing the attackers to contend with their own firepower. "It's working," Diana reported with cautious optimism. "They're breaking off the attack." Indeed, the Zaharian fighters were retreating to regroup, clearly unprepared for the defensive measures they had encountered. "We've bought some time," Murphy acknowledged, "but Colonel Vexile won't give up so easily, and those battle cruisers are still coming." Lisa checked her console. "The fleet is maintaining formation despite their efforts. Groups Alpha through Echo are proceeding toward the Kepler 442 system as planned. Our ghost images are still confusing their sensors." "And our real advantage is about to come online," Amy added. "The manufacturing vessels report production cycles at 80% capacity." Murphy allowed himself a moment of hope. The Valkyrie protocol had been theoretical until now, a desperate strategy developed during the long journey from Earth, designed to give their civilian fleet a fighting chance against military opposition. Its core insight was simple but revolutionary. While the fleet lacked traditional military vessels, it carried something potentially more valuable: an entire industrial infrastructure capable of continuous manufacturing and adaptation. The converted cargo ships didn't just transport people and supplies. They contained factories, workshops, and fabrication facilities. The mining vessels weren't just repurposed for weapons. They continued to extract resources from asteroids they encountered, feeding raw materials into the production cycle. In essence, the human fleet was a mobile industrial civilization, capable of producing its own ammunition, repairing damage, and even manufacturing new defensive systems while in transit. It was warfare reimagined through the lens of sustainable production rather than stockpiled arsenals. "Captain," Amy interrupted his thoughts, "the Zaharian station is hailing us again." Murphy straightened his jacket. On screen, Colonel Vexile appeared, his expression rigid with controlled anger. "Your actions constitute a clear act of war against the Zaharian Empire. Cease your advance immediately and surrender your vessels." "We've defended ourselves against unprovoked attacks," Murphy countered. "Your fighters fired first. After you deployed offensive electronic warfare measures and launched projectiles at an Imperial installation," Vexile retorted. Murphy decided to change tactics. "Colonel, this conflict benefits neither of us. We seek only passage to the Kepler systems beyond your territory. We have no interest in your worlds or resources. The Empire does not grant passage to hostile forces," Vexile stated flatly. "Your fleet has demonstrated military capabilities incompatible with your claim to be refugees." "We adapted what we had," Murphy explained, allowing some of his frustration to show. "Earth's collapse didn't give us time to build proper starships. We took our mining equipment, our cargo haulers, our science vessels, everything that could be made space-worthy, and converted them to save as many lives as possible." For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of understanding in the Zaharian's expression. "Every weapon we've deployed was once a tool for building or resource extraction," Murphy continued. "We're engineers and farmers and teachers forced to become soldiers because we had no other choice. But our purpose remained survival, not conquest." Vexile's response was cut short by an alarm sounding on his end of the communication. The colonel turned away briefly, listening to a report from off-screen. When he faced Murphy again, his expression had hardened once more. "Our battle cruisers have encountered your forward elements in the Kepler 442 system," he said coldly. "The deception of your divided fleet is now clear. This conversation is over." The screen went dark, leaving Murphy staring at his own reflection. "He's right about one thing," Lisa said quietly. Battle Group Alpha would have reached Kepler 442 by now. Murphy nodded grimly. They'll engage the cruisers as planned. All we can do now is continue with the protocol and hope it's enough. In the Kepler 442 system, the three Zaharian battle cruisers emerged from faster-than-light travel to find themselves facing an unexpected scenario. Instead of catching the human vessels unprepared, they discovered 43 ships already in defensive formation around a small rocky planet rich in mineral resources. Commander Zeke, leading the Imperial forces from the flagship Dominant, immediately recognized the strategic situation. The humans had anticipated their arrival and positioned themselves to use the planet's gravity well and surrounding asteroid field to tactical advantage. "Full combat alert," Zeke ordered. "Deploy all fighters and prepare main weapons for synchronized volley fire." The Imperial cruisers were the pride of the Zaharian fleet, massive vessels bristling with advanced weaponry and protected by multi-layered shield systems. Each was a match for dozens of conventional warships, and together they represented enough firepower to subjugate an entire star system. Against refugee ships, however modified, they should have been invincible. "Commander," the sensor officer reported, "we're detecting unusual activity among the human vessels. Several appear to be extracting resources from the nearby asteroids." Zeke's crest fluttered in confusion. "During combat preparations? Verify that reading." "Confirmed, sir. Mining equipment is active on multiple vessels, and we're detecting material transfer between ships." Before Zeke could process the implications of this behavior, the tactical officer called out, "Human vessels are launching projectiles." "Evasive maneuvers, all shields to forward sections," Zeke commanded. The battle cruiser's defensive systems activated as hundreds of objects accelerated toward them. But when the projectiles detonated, they didn't produce the expected explosions. Instead, they burst into clouds of superheated plasma and metallic particles, industrial slag weaponized through clever engineering. The clouds expanded rapidly, encompassing large volumes of space around the cruisers. While not directly damaging to the ship's hulls, the plasma interfered with sensors and created drag on the vessel's maneuvering systems. "They're blinding us," Zeke realized. "Clear those clouds with point defense systems and re-establish targeting locks on the largest human vessels." The cruiser's defensive weapons fired into the plasma clouds, creating temporary pathways for their sensors. But the humans had anticipated this response. As soon as the Zaharians established firing solutions, the targeted vessels released swarms of small, agile drones that interposed themselves between the cruisers and their targets. When the Imperial weapons fired, many of the energy beams and projectiles were intercepted by these sacrificial drones. Those that got through found their targets protected by improvised defensive systems, layers of ablative material stripped from asteroid mining operations and hastily attached to the hulls of the human ships. "This is taking too long," Zeke growled in frustration. "Advance to close combat range. Our superior shields will allow us to outlast whatever improvised weapons they possess." The three cruisers pushed forward through the defensive screen, their massive engines overpowering the resistance created by the plasma clouds. As they closed the distance, their weapons became more effective, scoring direct hits on several human vessels. But the expected disabling or destruction of these targets didn't materialize. Instead, the damaged ships retreated behind their companions, where Zaharian sensors detected intensive repair operations already underway. "Sir," the tactical officer reported with growing concern, "the humans are coordinating their manufacturing capabilities. The vessels we damaged are being repaired in real time, and we're detecting new weapon emplacements being constructed on previously unarmed ships." Zeke's frustration turned to alarm. This wasn't just a clever defensive strategy, it was an entirely different approach to space combat. The human fleet was functioning as a mobile industrial base, adapting to Imperial tactics faster than the cruisers could press their advantage. "Target their resource collection operations," Zeke ordered. "If we cut off their supply chain, their manufacturing advantage becomes irrelevant." The cruisers adjusted their attack, focusing fire on the vessels actively mining asteroids and those transporting resources between ships. Several were severely damaged, forcing them to retreat deeper into the asteroid field. For a moment, it seemed the Imperial forces had found the humans' weakness. Then the second phase of the human defense revealed itself. From hiding places within the asteroid field emerged 30 more vessels, smaller, faster craft that had been concealed by the mineral-rich rocks. They swarmed toward the Imperial cruisers from multiple directions, launching waves of what appeared to be repurposed mining torpedoes. Individually, these weapons lacked the power to threaten a battle cruiser's shields, but they came in overwhelming numbers, striking in coordinated patterns that concentrated force on specific shield sectors. "Divert power to affected shield quadrants," Zeke commanded as his flagship shuddered under the assault. "Sir, shield generators are overheating from sustained impacts," the engineering officer warned. "We need to rotate our defensive orientation or risk localized failures." The other two cruisers reported similar challenges, forced to constantly adjust their positions to prevent shield collapse in any single area. This defensive necessity limited their offensive capabilities, reducing the pressure on the main human fleet. Zeke watched in growing disbelief as the tactical situation deteriorated. His 3 advanced warships, each representing the pinnacle of Imperial military technology, were being held at bay by converted civilian vessels using mining equipment and industrial machinery as weapons. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "Ignore it," Zeke snapped. "Prepare all remaining fighters for concentrated assault on their command vessels. We need to decapitate their coordination." "Commander," the first officer interjected respectfully but firmly, "our fighter complement is down to 38% of initial deployment. Their defensive screen has proven more effective than anticipated." The reality of the situation was becoming impossible to ignore. The battle had been raging for nearly 2 hours, and despite their technological superiority, the Imperial forces had failed to achieve any significant advantage. Worse, the longer the engagement continued, the more the humans adapted. New defensive formations, different weapon configurations, reinforced armor in previously damaged sections. Their fleet was evolving before the Zaharians' eyes. "Accept the transmission," Zeke finally ordered, his voice tight with suppressed rage. A human female appeared on the command screen, her expression calm despite the battle raging around her. "This is Captain Diana Hayes of Battle Group Alpha. I've been authorized to offer terms for a cessation of hostilities." "The Empire does not negotiate during combat," Zeke replied automatically. "Then we will continue to defend ourselves." Hayes responded evenly, "But be aware that 15 more vessel groups are approaching the Kepler system. Our full fleet will arrive within 12 hours. The implication was clear. If 3 Imperial cruisers couldn't overcome 43 human ships, what chance would they have against more than 200? "What terms do you propose?" Zeke asked, military pragmatism overriding Imperial doctrine. "Withdrawal of your forces from the Kepler 442 system. We claim this planet and its resources by right of first development. In exchange, we will limit our presence to this single system and establish a permanent communication channel for diplomatic relations." "The Empire does not cede territory to invaders," Zeke countered. Hayes's expression remained neutral. "We aren't invaders, Commander. We're settlers seeking a new home after the loss of our original world. We've demonstrated that conflict between us will be costly for both sides. Surely coexistence is preferable." Before Zeke could respond, his sensor officer called out, "Sir, Long-range detection shows multiple new contacts approaching from the direction of the human main fleet, estimated arrival in 3 hours. The tactical situation was clear. Even if the 3 cruisers could hold out until the 4th fleet arrived, the escalating conflict would result in significant Imperial casualties, and there was no guarantee of victory, given the humans' demonstrated adaptability. "I will relay your proposal to High Command," Zeke finally said. "Until their decision is received, I propose a temporary ceasefire." "Agreed," Hayes replied. "We will maintain our current positions and cease offensive operations." As the transmission ended, Zeke turned to his first officer. "Prepare a full tactical analysis of the engagement for High Command. Include all sensor data on their manufacturing capabilities and adaptive defense systems." The implications of this encounter extended far beyond a single border skirmish. If this was truly how humans waged war, through continuous production and adaptation rather than fixed military assets, the Empire's entire strategic doctrine might need revision. And if these were indeed refugees rather than invaders, the political ramifications could be even more complex. Back at the Valis Prime Station, Colonel Vexile received the preliminary reports from the Kepler 442 engagement with growing concern. What Commander Zeke described contradicted everything the Empire understood about conventional space warfare. "A mobile industrial base," he murmured, reviewing the tactical data. "They don't fight like soldiers, they fight like engineers." The realization forced him to reconsider his assumptions about the human fleet approaching his station. If Captain Murphy had been telling the truth about their refugee status, their defensive capabilities made more sense. They had converted their civilization's infrastructure for a journey of survival, not conquest. "Colonel," his communication officer interrupted, "Admiral Krixman is requesting an update on the situation." Vexile composed himself before accepting the transmission. Admiral Krixman's holographic image appeared in his office, the Admiral's expression grave. "I've reviewed Commander Zeke's report from Kepler 442, Krixman began without preamble. "The implications are concerning." "Yes, Admiral," Vexile agreed. "The humans display capabilities we failed to anticipate." "More than that," Krixman said. "They display a fundamentally different approach to space warfare. Our analysis suggests their entire fleet functions as a collective industrial system, capable of extracting resources, manufacturing components, and implementing design adaptations in real time." Vexile nodded. "Their tactics against our fighters showed similar characteristics. They use industrial equipment modified for defense, but maintain production capacity even during combat." "The High Council is convening to discuss our response," Krixman informed him. "Until their decision is reached, you are to maintain your defensive posture but avoid escalation if possible." "And if the humans attempt to advance past the station?" Vexile asked. Krixman's expression tightened. "Use minimum necessary force to maintain the border. But be aware, Colonel, we may be facing a situation without precedent in Imperial history." After the Admiral's image faded, Vexile returned to the command center, where the main display showed the human fleet continuing its slow advance toward the station. The ghost images generated by their electronic countermeasures made it impossible to determine exactly which vessels were real, but the overall formation was clear. "They're proceeding in a standard transit configuration," the tactical officer reported. "No obvious offensive preparations." Vexile studied the display thoughtfully. "What about their drone activity?" "Constant deployment and retrieval, sir. They appear to be rotating the devices to maintain coverage while servicing them." That pattern suggested sustainability, another indication of the humans' focus on continuous operation rather than short-term tactical advantage. "Open a channel to Captain Murphy," Vexile decided. When the human captain appeared on screen, Vexile noted signs of fatigue that hadn't been present during their earlier communications. This crisis was taking its toll on both sides. Captain Murphy, I've received reports of your engagement with our cruisers in the Kepler 442 system. Vexile began. Your forces have performed unexpectedly well. Murphy's expression remained guarded. We didn't want that fight, Colonel. We still don't want this one. Then perhaps it's time we discussed alternatives. Vexile suggested. The High Council is currently evaluating the situation. In the meantime, I'm authorized to maintain current boundaries without further escalation, provided your fleet's advance ceases. We can't remain stationary indefinitely, Murphy replied. Our vessels are designed for continuous operation. Extended idle periods create resource distribution problems. This confirmed another aspect of Zeke's report. The human fleet's systems were integrated to function while in transit, with resources and personnel moving between vessels as needed. What if I authorized limited movement within a designated sector? Vexile proposed. Enough to maintain your operations, but clear of critical Imperial installations. Murphy seemed surprised by the offer. That would be acceptable as a temporary measure while diplomatic discussions proceed. I'll need your assurance that your electronic warfare measures will be deactivated within that sector, Vexile added. Our systems must be able to accurately monitor your activities. Agreed for the designated area only, Murphy said after brief consideration. We'll maintain our defensive measures at its boundaries. The negotiation continued for several minutes, establishing parameters for the temporary arrangement. When it concluded, Vexile felt a complex mixture of relief and uncertainty. He had potentially prevented an immediate conflict, but the fundamental question remained unanswered. What would the Empire do with these humans in the long term? If they truly were refugees seeking new homes, Imperial policy provided clear options: controlled settlement in undeveloped systems under Imperial supervision, with appropriate taxation and resource-sharing agreements. But those policies assumed the settlers would be dependent on Imperial protection and infrastructure. These humans had demonstrated self-sufficiency beyond anything the Empire had encountered before. Their entire civilization was mobile, adaptable, and capable of defending itself against Imperial forces. That changed the balance of power in ways the High Council would need to address. For 3 tense days, an uneasy peace held at the Vallis Prime border. The human fleet maintained its position within the designated sector, their ghost images deactivated as agreed. Zaharian patrols monitored their activities, reporting continuous movement of small craft between the larger vessels, the internal logistics of a civilization in transit. In the Kepler 442 system, a similar arrangement prevailed. Commander Zeke's cruisers maintained position at the system's edge, while the human forces consolidated around the mineral-rich planet they had claimed. Long-range sensors detected the beginnings of orbital infrastructure, the first steps toward permanent settlement. On the 4th day, Admiral Krixman arrived at Vallis Prime aboard the dreadnought Indomitable, flagship of the 4th Fleet. His personal shuttle docked with the station, where Colonel Vexile waited to provide a first-hand account of the situation. Admiral, welcome to Vallis Prime. Vexile greeted him formally. I've prepared a comprehensive briefing on the human fleet's capabilities and behavior. Later, Colonel, Krixman replied. The High Council has reached a decision. Captain Murphy has agreed to come aboard the station for direct negotiations. I need your assessment of him as an individual before that meeting. Vexile hadn't expected this development. Face-to-face negotiations with a potential adversary were rare in Imperial diplomatic practice. He appears straightforward and practical, Vexile offered after a moment's consideration. His statements about their refugee status have remained consistent, and his tactical decisions suggest defensive rather than offensive priorities. Krixman nodded thoughtfully as they walked toward the station's conference chamber. The Council has reviewed all available data on human civilization. Our previous assessments were incomplete. In what way, Admiral? We evaluated them as a potential military threat based on conventional metrics, fleet size, weapons technology, territorial expansion. By those standards, they appeared insignificant. Krixman's expression was grave. We failed to recognize that their entire approach to civilization differs from our own. Vexile waited for the Admiral to elaborate. The Empire builds specialized systems for specific purposes, military vessels for war, agricultural worlds for food production, industrial stations for manufacturing. Efficiency through specialization has been our doctrine for 5 centuries. They reached the conference chamber, pausing outside its doors. Humans, it seems, prefer adaptability over specialization, Krixman continued. Their vessels serve multiple functions simultaneously. Their social structures prioritize innovation over stability. Even their approach to conflict emphasizes production over destruction, making them unpredictable opponents, Vexile noted, and potentially valuable allies, Krixman added, which is why this negotiation matters. The High Council sees both opportunity and risk in their arrival. The Admiral straightened his formal uniform. Captain Murphy will arrive shortly. Observe the discussion closely. Colonel, your perspective will be valuable in the implementation of whatever agreement we reach. 30 minutes later, a human shuttle docked with the station. Captain Murphy emerged accompanied by 2 others, Lisa Bennett and Amy Rodriguez. Vexile learned from their introductions. The humans wore simple but dignified clothing that wasn't quite formal uniform, but clearly represented an attempt at diplomatic propriety. Admiral Krixman initiated the discussion with imperial directness. Captain Murphy, your fleet has created an unprecedented situation for the Empire. Before we address your request for passage or settlement, I need to confirm, does your fleet represent the entirety of human military capability, or are you an advance element for a larger force? Murphy met the Admiral's gaze steadily. We represent what remains of human civilization, Admiral. Earth's environmental systems reached critical failure 3 years ago. We evacuated everyone we could, about 7 million people from a population of billions, and converted every space-capable vessel for the journey. Your entire civilization travels with you? Krixman seemed skeptical despite the evidence. Lisa Bennett spoke up. We had to be entirely self-sufficient for a multi-year journey. Our fleet includes agricultural vessels for food production, manufacturing ships for industrial needs, educational facilities, medical centers, everything necessary to maintain not just life, but society itself. Which explains your industrial combat capabilities, Vexile observed. You didn't convert civilian ships into warships. You're using civilian industrial capacity as a military asset. Necessity drives innovation, Murphy acknowledged. We couldn't build a conventional military fleet in the time we had, so we adapted what was available. Our mining vessels became our artillery. Our construction equipment became our defensive systems. Our resource extraction operations became our supply chain. Amy Rodriguez added, our intelligence suggested we would encounter established civilizations during our journey. We hoped for peaceful reception, but prepared for the alternative. A prudent approach? Krixman conceded. Now, regarding your request to pass through Imperial territory and establish settlements beyond our borders, the High Council has authorized me to offer an alternative proposal. The 3 humans exchanged glances, clearly not having expected this. The Empire controls numerous star systems with habitable planets that remain undeveloped due to resource allocation priorities, Krixman explained. We are prepared to grant settlement rights to 17 such worlds, distributed across 3 sectors adjacent to Imperial core systems. Murphy's surprise was evident. You're offering us planets within the Empire? Under specific conditions, Krixman qualified. Your settlements would acknowledge Imperial sovereignty and pay standard resource tributes. In exchange, you would receive the Empire's protection and access to established trade networks. And if we refuse, Murphy asked carefully, then you would be permitted passage through a designated corridor to seek settlement beyond our borders, Crixman replied, but without Imperial recognition or protection. Vexile observed the humans' reactions with interest. This offer represented a significant departure from standard Imperial policy toward refugee populations, which typically involves strict containment and supervision. Why this generosity? Murphy asked directly. Based on our interactions so far, I wouldn't have expected the Empire to welcome potential competitors within its borders. Crixman's expression remained neutral, but Vexile detected the subtle crest movements that indicated strategic calculation. The Empire has survived for 5 centuries by identifying and incorporating valuable assets, the Admiral stated. Your civilization's approach to technology and adaptation represents potential value. We prefer to have such value allied with us rather than developed in opposition. Murphy nodded slowly. In other words, you'd rather have us inside your tent than outside it. An apt metaphor, Crixman acknowledged. There would be additional terms regarding technology sharing and military cooperation, of course, but the fundamental offer is genuine. We would need guarantees of autonomy for our settlements, Murphy said. Our people have sacrificed too much to surrender their self-determination. The Empire understands the importance of cultural continuity, Crixman assured him. Local governance would remain in your hands, provided Imperial tribute and security requirements are met. The negotiations continued for hours, delving into specifics of resource rights, settlement patterns, and integration timelines. Throughout the discussion, Vexile noted the pragmatic approach both sides brought to the table. The humans showed little of the ideological rigidity that had made other species difficult to incorporate into the Empire, while Admiral Crixman demonstrated unusual flexibility in adapting Imperial protocols to this unique situation. By the time the meeting concluded, a preliminary framework had been established. The human fleet would proceed to the first designated settlement world under Imperial escort. A formal treaty would be drafted during the journey, with ratification to follow once the initial settlement was established. As the humans prepared to return to their vessel, Murphy approached Vexile. Colonel, I want to thank you for your restraint during our first encounters. Things could have gone very differently without your willingness to consider alternatives to direct conflict. Vexile's crest rippled in the Zaharian equivalent of acknowledging a professional compliment. War is the Empire's last resort. Captain, not its first instinct. Your people demonstrated both capability and restraint, qualities the Empire respects. After the humans had departed, Crixman turned to Vexile. Your assessment of the situation was accurate, Colonel. These humans represent both opportunity and challenge for the Empire. Integrating them will require adjustments to our usual protocols. Do you believe they'll honor the agreement? Vexile asked. Crixman considered the question seriously. I believe they're sincere in their desire for peaceful settlement. Whether that remains true as they establish themselves within our borders will depend largely on how we manage the relationship. And if they become too independent, Vexile pressed. The Admiral's expression hardened slightly. Then the Empire will respond as it always has to internal challenges. But I suspect these humans understand the value of cooperation better than most. Their entire survival strategy depends on it. As Vexile returned to his duties, he reflected on the remarkable events of the past week. What had begun as a potential invasion had transformed into a complex diplomatic arrangement that might reshape the Empire's future. The humans had demonstrated a fundamentally different approach to civilization, one built on adaptation and integration rather than specialization and hierarchy. Their journey from a dying homeworld had forced them to reimagine how a society could function, creating something uniquely resilient in the process. There would be challenges ahead. Certainly, cultural integration always created friction. and the humans' industrial capabilities would inevitably raise concerns among those who preferred the Empire's traditional military dominance to remain unchallenged. But Vexile found himself cautiously optimistic. 5 centuries of Imperial history had taught that strength came in many forms. Perhaps this new form, this civilization in transit that had turned cargo ships into warships and mining equipment into artillery, would bring fresh vitality to an empire that had grown perhaps too comfortable in its dominance. Aboard the Marathon, Captain Murphy shared the outcome of the negotiations with his leadership council. Reactions were mixed, as expected. Some expressed concern about placing their future under Imperial authority, while others saw the practical advantages of settlement within an established interstellar civilization. "We'll maintain our autonomy where it matters most," Murphy assured them. "The agreement guarantees our right to local self-governance and cultural continuity." "And our industrial capabilities?" Lisa Bennett asked. "The Empire will certainly want access to our adaptation technologies, which we'll share selectively in exchange for their advanced propulsion and energy systems," Murphy confirmed. "It's a trade that benefits both sides." Amy Rodriguez, ever the pragmatist, summarized the situation. "We came looking for survival. We've found opportunity. The Empire offers protection and resources we'd struggle to secure on our own beyond their borders." Diana Hayes, who had commanded the defensive action at Kepler 442, added her perspective. "They respect strength and capability. Our demonstration of both earned us this offer. Without it, we'd be facing very different terms." Murphy nodded agreement. "Our journey from Earth forced us to become something new, not just refugees, but innovators. The Empire sees value in that innovation. Our challenge now is to preserve what makes us unique, while integrating into their larger civilization." As the discussion continued, Murphy stepped away briefly to gaze out a viewport at the Zaharian dreadnought that would escort them to their new home. Its massive form represented both the power they would now have supporting them and the authority they would need to accommodate. Earth was lost, but humanity had survived, not just as refugees granted mercy, but as equals who had earned respect through ingenuity and determination. Their fleet of converted ships had become something the mighty Zaharian Empire considered worthy of alliance rather than conquest. Operation Exodus had begun as a desperate bid for survival. It had evolved into humanity's greatest achievement, reimagining civilization itself for a future among the stars. As Captain Murphy returned to the discussion about settlement plans and integration protocols, he carried a profound sense of both accomplishment and responsibility. 7 million lives depended on the decisions made in the coming months. The path ahead would not be easy, but they had already overcome the impossible. They had transformed mining equipment into weapons that held Imperial battlecruisers at bay. They had converted cargo haulers into living habitats that sustained millions through the void of space. They had turned scientific vessels into the vanguard of a new phase of human existence. Whatever challenges the Empire presented, humanity would adapt. It was what they did best. The human fleet began its journey toward the first settlement world the following day, escorted by Admiral Krixman's dreadnought. As they proceeded deeper into Imperial territory, the fleet maintained its operational routines, the constant movement of resources between vessels, the ongoing manufacturing operations, the educational and cultural activities that had sustained them through their long exodus from Earth. From his command post on the Vallis Prime station, Colonel Vexile watched them depart, still processing how thoroughly they had defied Imperial expectations. The official report would describe a diplomatic resolution to a border incident, but the reality was more profound. The Empire had encountered something new, not just another species to incorporate into its expanding dominion, but a fundamentally different approach to civilization itself. Whether this encounter would strengthen the Empire or eventually challenge its foundations remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: the arrival of these human refugees had changed the galactic landscape. Their journey of survival had demonstrated that adaptation could be as powerful as domination, that civilian infrastructure could become military strength when necessity demanded, and that even the most desperate circumstances could give birth to innovation. The Empire had believed itself terrified by a human armada. In truth, they had witnessed the birth of a new kind of civilization, one forged in the crucible of extinction and tempered by the long journey between stars. Whatever emerged from the integration of these humans into the Empire would shape the future of the galaxy for centuries to come. And it had all begun with a simple sensor reading: 200 civilian vessels, heavily modified, approaching the Imperial border. That couldn't be a human armada, they had thought. They had been right. It was something far more significant.